If she gets down the aisle without breaking something, I shall call it a miracle of the age." The Duke of Ambervale heard it from behind his left shoulder, in the church porch, spoken by a young man in a primrose waistcoat to two ladies who laughed exactly as long as good manners allowed and no longer, and he did not turn round, because he had already seen who was meant. She was standing just inside the door with the bride's train over both arms, a tall woman of 6 or 7 and 20 in grey silk that had been made over from something older, holding 11 feet of Brussels lace off a flagstone floor, while her sister was fussed at by 4 other people. She had a plain face made interesting by patience. She was doing the only piece of real work in the building. Everard Ancaster had come to this wedding out of duty. The bridegroom was his cousin's boy, the Marchmonts were nothing to him, and he had intended to sit through the service, enjoy the breakfast, and be on the road by 4. He watched the woman in grey shift her grip on the lace and step back and put her foot wrong on the worn flagstone by the font and stumble. She did not fall. She caught the pillar. But the prayer book went out of her hand and skidded along the stone, and the sound of it went up into the roof, and the primrose waistcoat said, at exactly the wrong volume, "There, 2 minutes." Somebody snorted. The bride's mother said, "Cecily," in the voice of a woman who has said a name that way for years, and Cecily Marchmont said, "I beg your pardon, Mama," and bent awkwardly, and picked up her prayer book, and gathered the lace again, and her face did not change at all. Everard found that he had put his hand on the back of the pew in front of him. He watched her through the whole of the service. He watched her steady an old woman on the chancel step with a hand under the elbow so unobtrusive that the old woman never knew she had been helped. He watched her produce a pin from her own cuff when the veil slipped, and set it, and step back. He watched her sing without a book, because she had given the book to a guest who had none, and he watched her walk. The Duke of Ambervale had hunted for 22 years, and had seen a great many men come off horses, and had spent one winter of his own on a couch with a broken thigh, cursing a surgeon. He knew what he was looking at. That was not clumsiness. That was a hip that had been broken badly, and had healed as it liked, and a left hand that would not close entirely, and a body that had learned to manage a great deal without complaining about any of it, and every single person in that church had agreed to call it something else. At the churchyard gate he found the head groom holding the greys, an old man with a face like a walnut. "You are Marchmont's man?" "Barnes, your grace, 41 years. Then tell me about the elder daughter." The old man's jaw worked. "Miss Cecily," he said. "What of her, your grace?" "How?" Barnes looked at the horses for a while. "Water Meadow," he said. 6 year gone come August. Miss Arabella took the black mare out, and she'd been told not, on account of the mare going through a gate the spring before and near killing a carter. Miss Arabella was 17, and it were a hot day. He rubbed his nose. Mare bolted at the plank bridge. Miss Cecily were on foot with a basket. She got in front of it, your grace. Stood in the gap between the rail and the water where there weren't but 4 foot, so as the mare couldn't go past, and she got a hand to the rein and pulled her sister's leg free of the leather as she come off. And then the mare went over her," said Barnes. "Hip, wrist, and something in the shoulder as never come right. 14 month in her bed. Doctor said she'd not walk, and she walks, and there's the whole of it. Who else knows?" "Every soul in the parish under the rank of gentleman," said Barnes. "And the family, o' course. The family." The old groom's eyes came up, and there was something old and hard in them. "It weren't never said out, your grace," he said. "Not once. If it were said out, it'd have to be said out as Miss Arabella took the mare when she were told not, and that were the year they were bringing her forward. So it come to be a fall. Miss Cecily fell, they say. She'd a fall, poor thing, she's never been right since, and ain't she awkward, and they've said it that many times they believe it, and Miss Cecily lets 'em." He turned and spat into the hedge, and then remembered himself. "Beg pardon, your grace." "Do not," said Everard. "It was the most useful thing anyone has done in this parish today." The breakfast was in the long room at Marchmont Hall, 90 covers, the windows open on the June heat, and the smell of cut grass coming in over the wine. He was placed high, 'cause he was a duke, and Cecily Marchmont was placed at the very foot between a deaf clergyman and an empty chair, and she was up out of that chair a dozen times in the first hour, for the wine, for the deaf clergyman's plate, for a dropped fan, for her mother's shawl. The toast began at 3. Mr. Tobias Frayne of the Primrose Waistcoat gave the bridesmaids, and gave them in the modern manner, which is to say he was funny, and he came at last to the eldest of them, and said, "And to Miss Marchmont, who has held the train, and held it, I am told, without a single accident, which those of us who were at the Hartley ball will recognize as an achievement of the first order." The laugh went round the whole table. Not a cruel laugh. Worse, a comfortable one, the laugh of 90 people at a joke they had all made themselves at one time or another and had long ago stopped hearing. At the head of the table the bride laughed too, with her hand over her mouth, and did not stop. Her mother leaned along and said, in the carrying whisper of the deaf and the confident, "Cecily, do sit down, dearest, before you upset the glasses." Cecily Marchmont sat down. She had risen to acknowledge the toast, because she had been brought up to, and she sat down again in the middle of it, with her face perfectly still and her eyes on the cloth, and put her damaged left hand into her lap where it could not be seen. The Duke of Ambervale stood up. 90 people stopped at once. A duke on his feet at a country wedding breakfast is a considerable event, and the room arranged itself in an instant into the pleased hush of guests about to be honoured. "Forgive me," said Everard. "I am a stranger here, and I have no right to the floor. I shall take about 2 minutes of it." "Your Grace does us too much," began Mr. Marchmont. "I have not begun to do you anything, sir." He let that settle. "Mr. Frayne has toasted the bridesmaids very prettily, and I should like to add to it, because there is a piece of information wanting at this table, and I find I cannot eat another course beside it. 6 years ago, in August, on the plank bridge at the bottom of your own water meadow, a black mare bolted the bride upon her. The sound the room made was not a sound. It was a change of pressure. Miss Cecily Marchmont was on foot, said the Duke of Ambervale. She put herself into the gap between the rail and the water, where there is not 4 feet of ground in front of a bolting horse, deliberately, because it was the only place where the mare could be stopped. She got her hand to the rein and she pulled her sister's leg clear of the leather as she came off. The mare then went over her and broke her hip, her wrist, and her shoulder, and she was 14 months in her bed, and was told by a surgeon that she would not walk again. She walks. You have all watched her do it today. You have been watching her do it for 6 years, and you have agreed among yourselves to call it awkwardness, and you have made a small, comfortable joke of it that costs each of you nothing and her everything. And I have heard it made 4 times since 11 o'clock this morning by people who owe her a sister. Somewhere down the table a glass went over. Nobody moved to right it. I do not say this to distress the bride on her wedding day, said Everard more quietly. I have no doubt whatever that she was 17, and that it was a hot afternoon, and that she has been sorry every day since, and I imagine she was never once permitted to say so aloud, which is its own kind of unkindness and was not her doing either. He turned. But I have been in this parish 6 hours, and a groom in your stable yard told me the truth in 90 seconds, and not one person in this room has told it in 6 years, and so I have told it, and I will not apologize for it. To Miss Marchmont, who is the bravest person at this table, and the only one who has done a day's work in it. He raised his glass. For perhaps 3 seconds nothing at all happened. Then old Barnes's daughter, who was pouring at the sideboard, put down the jug and said, "To Miss Cecily," quite loudly, in a servant's voice, in the middle of a gentleman's dining room, and the deaf clergyman got up, and then the whole lower half of the table went up in a scrape of chairs like a wave breaking, and after them, unevenly, shamefully, the rest. The bride was crying into her hands. Mr. Tobias Frayne had gone the colour of his own linen, and was not looking up. Mrs. Marchmont sat entirely still with her mouth slightly open, and Everard felt distinctly the death of something in that woman that ought to have died years before. And Cecily Marchmont sat at the foot of her father's table with her hands in her lap, and looked down the length of it at him, and she was not crying and she was not smiling, and there was an expression on her face that he would spend a good deal of the rest of his life attempting to earn again. She left the room within the minute. He found her in the yew walk at the side of the house, standing quite straight and holding on to a branch. "You should not have done that," she said. "They will not forgive it, not one of them. My mother." "Your mother," said Everard, "may take it up with me at her convenience. You do not know us. You do not know me. You have been here since 11 and you have, her voice went. She stopped and mastered it and began again. 6 years, I have not once heard it said aloud. I stopped expecting to. I made a kind of peace with it, your grace, and it was a bad peace, but it was mine, and you have broken it in front of 90 people, and I do not know what to do with what is left. Then I will tell you what I know, he said, and you may do as you please with it. I know that you stood in a 4-foot gap. I know what that costs and what it goes on costing. I know that you have carried a train all day for a girl who laughed at you, and pinned her veil, and given away your prayer book, and that when you were mocked you sat down so as not to make a scene at your sister's wedding. He looked at her steadily. I have been a duke for 19 years, and I have been flattered by experts, and I have never once wanted the good opinion of anybody in the way that I want yours. That is the whole of it, and it is a great deal to say to a woman one has known for 6 hours, and I am aware of it, and I am too old to pretend otherwise. Cicely Marchmont let go of the branch. I'm not able to dance, she said. You should know that before you say anything further. I can stand for perhaps a quarter of an hour. I cannot ride at all. There are 3 doors in this house I cannot use. Which 3? She blinked. The library. There is a step. Then I shall want the names of the other 2, said the Duke of Ambervale, and a mason. He stayed 4 days, and then he came back a fortnight later, and then he came back every fortnight until October, and the county talked itself hoarse. He married her in the same church in the following April, on the same worn flagstone by the font, which had by then relaid level, quietly. At his charge, by a man from Ambervale who had been told to say nothing about it and had said nothing about it, and Cecily walked the whole length of the aisle without once putting out a hand. There was no gap between the rail and the water at Ambervale, and there were no steps in the library. And in the long gallery where the county came to be entertained the floor had been taken up and laid true from end to end during the winter, and if she noticed she never said so, and neither did he for 11 years. She asked him once late why he had stood up in a room where he knew nobody, for a woman he had never spoken to. Everard Ancaster considered it. Because you have been holding 11 feet of lace off the floor for an hour, he said, and every soul in that church was looking at the bride, and I have never in my life been able to look at the wrong thing. And the Duchess of Ambervale, who had been called awkward for 6 years by people who ought to have known better, put her damaged left hand into her husband's, where it had been going every evening for 11 years, and let him close his fingers over it, and said nothing at all, because there was no longer the smallest thing that needed saying.